time. It is the end of February. It's been a really busy month. I am still actually very busy. I have to be very busy for another 2 more weeks. I think it helps that I can see the end of the tunnel. This month, even though I was very busy, I managed to read quite a lot. Whenever I'm sitting on like a train or bus, I tell myself that I need to maximize my commuting time by being a productive reader. So I was a very productive reader this month. Not that it was a particularly leisurely or relaxing activity, but at least I managed to achieve like some personal objectives that I set out for myself. It feels a bit like a compromise. If I can't have the slow life that I have always wanted for myself, because it's really not realistic, then at the very least, I would like to be able to achieve the same objectives that I would have set out for myself if that kind of life were possible. Does that make sense? Okay, so this month I read some books for the purpose of understanding a few talks that were being given by my university professor. So it's a bit like assigning myself homework, but thankfully for me, the homework that she assigns is very fun. So book 1 that I read, Waist Type by qiufan. Is it qiufan or is it qiufan? I do not know. My reading ability for Chinese is such that even if I were to look at the characters, I have absolutely no idea the intonation that they should be in. So I think this guy has like a English pen name. Anyway, this book was translated by Liew. Okay, there is no like Ken Liu's name or what, but there is a translator's note. This book, it counts as a eco-techno thriller. It is Asian dystopian literature. It's a little bit cyberpunk in the sense that people do walk around with cybernetic augmentations all over their body, from their brain to their limbs to even their skin. When I was reading it, the whole time in my head, I was just thinking of Ghost in the Shell, that movie that came out around the time that I was born in like the mid-1990s. So in that kind of future as well, which is also another techno thriller movie that envisions a really bleak and depressing future for humanity. You have Kusanagi Shosa, right? She's Major Kusanagi. Basically, the only thing that is organic left about her is her brain, and everything else is just cyborg. So there's this idea of like, where does the soul reside? You could transfer your soul to another container. Does that in any way disqualify you from being considered as human being? This book is a little bit like that, except it does add in this dimension of pollution. So it's called Waist Type because it's talking about like a group of people in an offshore island, which is still considered part of China. What they do is that they sort through the waste from all over the world. So the people who live there are living in extremely bad conditions. It is an ecological disaster. Just, oh my god, there is a cat downstairs. Okay, wait. Okay, I'll go down later. Oh my god, it's so fat. Okay, I think it's someone's cat. Okay, yeah, so going back to this book. On this island, the air is basically unbreathable. You need to wear like a mask. Long-term exposure to that kind of environment would definitely give you some kind of cancer. The lifespans are very short. Somehow humanity still manages to survive. They manage to produce children over there, so there are natives and then there are people who are tricked into coming to this island to sort waste with the prospect of for maybe like a better pay that they can send back home. The reality of the matter is that they are basically selling their lives and shortening their lifespans in exchange for a little bit of money. The whole island just screams unethical labor practices. So this book focuses mostly on one character called Mimi. She's one of those girls who went over to the island called Silicon Isle because she needed to make money and she wanted to save up enough so she could go home and then open like a general goods store and then let her parents retire and just like live a very normal kind of life. So there is this like aspiration towards social mobility. Unfortunately, she is caught up in interclan politics. I'm not sure if this is a spoiler, but she manages to transfer her soul out of her body after a very brutal assault and infuse it in a kind of like a machine robot that was imbued with this kind of like mythical potential because somebody else died in there. Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, like thinking back about it now, like I'm like, that sounds crazy, but you need to read it to understand the plot. Okay, yeah. Obviously, like, this creates a kind of like split consciousness between the actual girl Mimi and the newly awakened consciousness Mimi. And this new consciousness Mimi, she has this kind of a desire to escape into the great internet where she can then roam free. But original Mimi, that's not what she wants. She is still human and she still has qualms about doing things like killing people, and also she's just a little girl. So I think you can tell that this book is not going to end well. There is absolutely no way for a book like this to have a happy ending. The next book that I read it on Libby. It was a really long queue. I think because the person before that didn't return early, so I had to wait. So it's Dandelion by a Canadian Chinese writer called Jamie Chai Yun Liu. It reminded me a little bit of Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston, but it also reminded me a little bit of the Amy Tan kind of novel and short story, you know, the kind that specifically writes about the Asian American diaspora experience. There are writers who sort of write only in that genre, like diaspora literature, and as much as like I can understand why they would do it, at the same time it feels a little bit overhanded. The extreme emphasis on feeling foreign and packaging their own culture for what feels often like Western consumption. That's something that I'm not particularly comfortable with in Amy Tan's works. I'm not sure if she's still around, but I hope she never ever finds out I said that. Yeah, it just I know it's a way to make bang lah, but I've never been comfortable with it. On the other hand, I really liked Woman Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston, even though it goes in a similar vein, but you wouldn't say that it has the same level of seeking understanding from a Western audience as a book like, say, Joy Luck Club. So that's just my personal opinion. Woman Warrior really is one of my ultimate favorites. It's I have it here. Because it's a feminist work and it's so angry, and that is something that I can appreciate. So for Dandelion, it doesn't really have feminine rage in it, or as much as I thought it would, but what it does is that it manages to be diaspora literature without being too like showy about it. Yeah, it is definitely about a family who lives in Canada now but who have had roots in other places like Brunei, Malaysia, basically Southeast Asia. They were sort of disenfranchised and chased out of the countries that they grew up in because of they were the racial minority over there, and they were not given citizenship. So there's always this like unrootedness or this unmooredness to the characters that affects everything that they do and affects even like their relationships with each other. But then when they move to Canada and then they finally put down roots, there is still this idea that you want to go back, you want to go home, that even though you manage to achieve stability, comfort, it is not home. This idea of home or this search for home is an elusive one. Another thing about this book is that it also talks a lot about the concept of like motherhood and sacrifice. This book was really good. Without hesitation, I gave it 5 stars. I felt that it was really poignant, I felt it was really heart-wrenching, but it did all that without being very like flashy about it. So there's a subtlety to the writing that I really appreciated. So definitely 5 stars. Everyone needs to read this book. The next 2 books, I'm just gonna review them together because they are considered a duology. To review them separately, it just feels a bit strange. So this is the Book of Tea duology by Judy Lin. Book 1 is called A Magic Steeped in Poison. Book 2 is called A Venom Dark and Sweet. You hear the titles, right? You already know it's YA. There is no adult book that's gonna have a title like that. For this duology, I really wanted to like it because it's Chinese fantasy and it has to do with tea. There is magic and there's fighting, so you know, all the things that usually I would like are already inside. Unfortunately, I found myself a little bit like unable to enjoy it, especially in book 1, because the pacing of the writing just felt a little bit like poorly planned. For example, when we are reading the first, like maybe like the first 50% of the book, this is the part where you are supposed to fall for your protagonist. It is the exposition of the book, so you need to like build some kind of emotional connection so that later on when your protagonist like suffers, you can feel for them. I think like the pacing was just so rushed and not very developed. You kind of assume that you are already going to root for the protagonist even though you don't even know that much about the protagonist, or you don't even have any very good reasons to root for her. Out of the blue, she's thrust into danger and challenges very quickly, and then she also meets a guy, and then for some reason, even though they only meet like 1 or 2 times, they are like falling in love with each other already. And it just feels very fast. But then like the thing is, you can tell that the writing improves after this painful period is over. So it's almost as if like the author wanted you to read the middle portion onwards, and then she was like, okay, no, I need to add on like a backstory. So she wrote like the backstory much later on. I wouldn't say that I'm a huge fan of it, but I can understand lah. I mean, if she wrote any more, then the book would become like maybe too long, and maybe that was not what was allowed. I'm just guessing over here, right? Trying to make excuses already. Another thing that I didn't really like about this book series was that the magic system was very confusing. So I am Chinese, right? So I can read Chinese. So for things like Shen Nong, I know exactly what that means because I watched like a lot of wuxia films in my lifetime. But there is hardly any explanation of who the gods are, what the gods are. Does the magic even come from the gods, or does the magic come from the individual? Does the magic come from the earth? Is the magic something that is inherited? Why does it seem like she inherited her mother's power, but she is not exactly her mother's apprentice, and her sister is her mother's apprentice? And you know, so there are just a lot of things that don't make sense and they don't link up properly in this book, and you're just supposed to accept it and just go along with it. Sometimes things seem added in just for fun, or just to make something else make sense later on without actually being properly moored within the world building. So the world building is a little bit shaky. In book 2, we get like a shift of perspective. So instead of seeing it from like Ning's perspective, we get like interspersed characters where we see it from her boyfriend's perspective as well. His name is Kang. And even for Kang's narrative, the whole idea is that we are supposed to feel for him, right? We spend like the most of book 1 questioning his intentions, wondering if he's a good guy or he was lying all this time. Turns out he was like not exactly lying, but at the same time it's like we are supposed to now feel sympathy for this guy, and we're even supposed to feel sympathy for his like villain of a father, because his father went crazy only after his wife died and he was like wrecked by grief. So okay, fine, I can understand that. But then things like randomly giving Kang a Shaolin pass to fit the story of him recognizing one of the Shaolin masters but who no longer recognized him, it just feels like a little last minute. Maybe I'm just being like too critical of what is supposed to be like a fun adventure novel for teenagers. I honestly had higher expectations. That's on me, that's my fault. I shouldn't have had expectations at all. I know a lot of people love this series, and I can see why. Maybe if I were a bit younger, I would have really fallen in love with this duology. Unfortunately, I am a cynical adult. Okay, next. This one, oh my gosh, it's really not visible anymore. This is the book 2 of Strange the Dreamer. I'm gonna put like a digital version of the cover over here so that you can see what it's meant to look like. But I think this book was really just too popular. Everyone borrowed it, and then it's like falling apart as a result. You see? And the cover is like just completely gone already from wear and tear. So this is clearly a well-loved library book. Muse of Nightmares is book 2 of another duology. The chapters are like interspersed between what happens in the past and what happens after the events of book 1. So it's like a semi-prequel in that sense. Usually, right, book 2 is disappointing, but then this book 2 was excellent. And the thing about this book is that like the scenes from the past, like the prequel chapters, they were actually extremely necessary for the resolution in the present. And what we find out in the chapters that have to do with the events in the past is that all of this started because of 2 sisters who really loved each other. And this may be a trope, I don't really care, but I really love it when stories focus on familial love instead of like romantic love. For example, even like books like Sister Song, the romance portions don't appeal to me. But when I read about siblings who love each other or siblings who fight for each other, that's just something that I really like. In this prequel, there are 2 sisters who are basically soulmates. They love each other more than anything else in this world. They are separated, and even though they were unable to get to each other, they tried their best to return to each other. They promised to save each other. If they did, then the events that happened in book 1 wouldn't have happened. but them coming to terms with it, them getting the reunion that is perhaps not ideal, but definitely the one that they deserved after all this time. That was like the emotional cornerstone of the entire novel. I felt like that really just elevated the series to something other than just a mere adventure novel. At the end of the day, I feel like it is the strength of the human relationships within a novel that determine whether or not it's a work of art. Even though there's like a lot of focus on the lore that came before book 1, it doesn't mean that the other characters were neglected. All of them were continued to be developed in their own way. Even like the bad guy in book 1, who is like Theon Nero. In this book, he is given like a sort of like queer storyline where we find out a little bit more about why he doesn't exactly want to just go back and accept his arranged marriage. Book 2 really was a good book in that it tied up all of these loose ends without feeling forced or without feeling like they did it only out of necessity. So this duology, like book 1 and book 2 together, read together, I really think like it's a really good work of art. I really think that it's like a really good example of what a fantasy series should look like. Is it YA? I guess it's YA. It's definitely the characters in there are teenagers, most of them. They're below the age of 21. But is it PG-13? No, it's not PG-13. Like some of the characters in there are damn horny. So I hesitate to call it YA, but at the same time I feel like just because a work has sexual content in it does not mean that it's not fit for younger readers. It's a bit erroneous to assume that younger readers have no concept of sexuality. So at the end of the book also, it's kind of hinted that there's more to come. Wait, I find for you. The end, or is it? So you know what this means, right? This means that there could be like maybe a spin-off, or maybe there could be like short stories that are set in the same universe, because the way that this book ended, it really opened up a lot of possibilities for future works within the same universe. In a way, it's a little bit like the hossain series by Garth Nix. The world exists, the world is excellent, the world has been built excellently. So if there were any more stories to arise from this particular world, I would definitely read them. Okay, next book, Cyber Mage by Saad Hossain. I hope I'm saying that right. The people who enjoy this book are gamers. Like personally, when I was reading it, I sort of like mentally slotted it in with books like Ender's Game, Ready Player One, Sword Art Online, things like that. The main character in this book is number 1, a gamer, but he's also like a world level sort of pro hacker, and this means that he does like coding, programming, whatever. It's set in the future, but this future is dystopian. It is horrific. There is violence, definitely. There is drug addiction. Structurally, very similar to the world here, but it is funny. The author doesn't approach a world like this with bleak acceptance, but instead he turns it into a kind of a dark comedy. Yeah, everything is going to shit for sure, but it doesn't mean that the characters are not going to sass each other. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be sarcastic. It doesn't mean that funny shit's not gonna happen. They're gonna bicker. The dialogue writing is just so good. It's so funny. I feel like once you put humor inside like your book, right, there is already this expectation that it's not going to be considered high literature. I don't think that is what the author is interested in creating. I think he's interested in creating a entertaining but also a very imaginative piece of work. In this world, AI has become like the backbone of society. Technology has advanced so far that Final Fantasy is at its 9,000th iteration. There is also no such thing as scarcity anymore because nanotech has taken over the need to work or even to produce labor. So the idea is that because of nanotech, people no longer need food. In fact, they don't even really need oxygen to survive. Because everyone has been infected with nanotech, this thing keeps you alive even if you don't have access to food, water, or clean air. I know it's very hard to imagine. For me, I was struggling with that concept because how then do you calculate the value of a person, right? I mean, once it is no longer necessary for you to produce value through labor, how then do you gain access to the things that you want and the things that you need? So yeah, I feel like there are many interesting questions that are brought up by such a premise. Even like things like manual labor, farm labor, all these things are no longer necessary anymore. So what then do people do? How then do they make a living? I mean, this really takes the idea of everybody has value to a very extreme position, because do they then? So another thing that I really liked about this book was that it took the concept of jinn, mythical creatures, and made it real. So even the jinn, they are also very advanced. They are also using technology. They are also able to join the internet. Even if human beings were able to upgrade themselves by using technology, if the jinn are also able to upgrade themselves using technology, there will always be this like power disparity between the jinn and the human beings. I gave this book like a 4 stars because it was just very entertaining. I think it's very funny. Honestly, some of the parts that talk about like the hacking or the coding or the programming, they just went over my head because I don't do any of that, so I didn't really understand it. But I'm sure there are people out there who would. And I did understand like the game parts. It reads like a love letter to every gamer out there. Let's talk about this. Not Without Us by ethosbooks. So this was actually like an advanced reading copy. They did send me a e-copy, but I have no e-reader that can allow me to read PDFs properly. So that was a real pain. I read a little bit and then I was like, no, I cannot. I need to wait for the physical copy. So once it arrived, I tried to transfer whatever annotations I had on my e-copy into the physical copy. And then I continued reading from there. In this book, there are 21 essays. Yeah, there are about 21 essays in here. I know that there was an expectation to produce a review at the end of January, but I decided to not force myself to rush or to skim through this book for the sake of producing a review, because it feels very like disrespectful to the contributors. These are actually highly personal essays. They are written by people from the disabled community in Singapore, and I get that a book like this is expected to be lauded as important. I know that there was a timeline, but it just didn't feel right to maybe like just anyhow skim through a few chapters and then skip the chapters that I found boring or what, just so I could meet some kind of arbitrary deadline. It would be easy to do that, right? You can just write something very generic, you can just praise this book and then ask people to go and buy it. But I feel like that completely defeats the purpose of having a book like this in the first place. So that's not how I work. Not shading anyone. Continuing, I'm actually still like gathering my thoughts about it. I'm hoping that I'll be able to have some kind of like written review of it, maybe in long form, because one video and one Instagram caption is just not enough. It's 20 essays in here, you know? To summarize it all in one Instagram caption, it just does not feel very possible. And even if it were possible, it is not going to be done well. So I feel like this very strong need to do things well, specifically because of this book, specifically because of this topic. And I am also like speaking to somebody else who I would say gives me the opportunity to view this book from a more critical point of view. Not that I completely subscribe to whatever they are telling me, but I think like if they hadn't said anything to me, I wouldn't have known it either. Not every essay in here is considered like academic writing. Definitely, like most of them, they have references, right? So you see, endnotes and whatnot. They do look like essays, proper academic essays, but some of them are also highly personal reflections, mainly about their own experiences that don't necessarily reference an existing body of work or try to critically analyze any form of literature. I feel like those non-academic essays are the ones that spoke more to me. For writing to be, oh my god, there is another cat. It's a different cat. Oh my gosh, there was a brown cat just now and there's a black cat now. This is such a good day. I see it as a good sign. I see it as a sign from heaven. Like today I got to like see 2 cats. Not 1 but 2. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, I was saying that the chapters that were more of personal reflections rather than academic essays spoke more to me, because I feel like once you try to intellectualize your experience, it already automatically creates a kind of like critical distance between you and the topic at hand. Perhaps it is necessary in order to legitimize whatever you are saying, but that's what is expected. When it comes to something like people's lived experiences, I feel like you don't need to make it compulsory to make it be super academic and formal and supported by secondary texts and whatnot. As someone pointed out to me, that is already a form of ableism. I'm sorry that I am unable to like verbally review this book very well in this particular video. When my typed out like review is done, I will just like put it in the bio. I think like for something like this, I would err on the side of caution and choose coherence. For a book like this, it is better to have a written review, properly thought out and structured, rather than one that is scattered and all over the place, because people's lives are not storybooks. You know, you can't just summarize it and be like, oh, I felt this was relatable. Wow, I hate it. I hate it when people like review books based on relatability. Like, that completely defeats the purpose of reading, right? You're reading to encounter different perspectives, and the very definition of difference means that it might not necessarily be relatable already. Why? It's a different kind of experience on its own. So to say like, oh, I could relate, I couldn't relate, 5 stars, 4 stars, I am not okay with that at all. It doesn't matter whether or not I relate to a book like this. It matters that a book like this exists. That's all I can say for now. Last book for this month. Cannot see, is it? Spirits Abroad by Zen Cho. Cute, right? I love this lion. Like, honestly, I love the lion dance lion. I just don't like the volume. Yeah, the tong tong qiang is not something that I can handle. It's not like my poor nerves. I'm not a 19th century ailing old man, but loud noises are just not it for me. But I totally understand where it's coming from. Like, you need the loud noise to scare away the bad spirits, right? Okay lor. By the way, I found out that in Singapore, it is totally legal for you to hire a lion dance troupe to come to your house and perform outside your door, or like your own personal business. You can do that. It is not illegal. I thought it would be illegal because doesn't it count as a public nuisance? But I guess like if it's a Chinese people think it's not a public nuisance, right? It is a right. You'll be a grade A asshole lah, but it's not illegal law. You can do it if you want. Anyway, Spirits Abroad. This book, instant 5 stars. It is so good. It is not what I would call proper literature. It doesn't have proper English. It is not like very clean. Like there are a lot of swear words inside. Like there are a lot of Hokkien swear words inside. All that is colloquialism. I feel like all that makes the book accessible because you're using like, you know, the vernacular language that doesn't pander to the Western gaze. As a Singaporean, I thoroughly enjoyed every single story in this book. This book is a collection of short stories. So there are 19 short stories in here. You have here, you have there, and you have elsewhere. So the here is set in Malaysia because this writer is a Malaysian Chinese writer. The there is set like overseas, like in the UK, and then the elsewhere is set in mythical lands that don't fall under here or there. So each story centers around a supernatural being or a supernatural concept that should be familiar to you if you are from Southeast Asia. For example, the one that I liked was the one about the Pontianak. Everyone knows, right? They live in banana trees, and when you can smell like frangipani flowers out of the blue, you should run. And everyone is also familiar with sort of myth of the orang minyak, you know, the oily man who preys on young virgins, that kind of thing. Oh, these supernatural spirits or like ghosts or beings, they show up in this book, but they are not there to like scare you, be villains in the background. The author writes her stories in a way that allows you to encounter them up close and personally. These spirits speak to you. These spirits exist. These spirits sometimes even keep up with the times, and they are very modernized. It's especially funny because sometimes the situation is clearly one that would fit right in a horror movie, but the protagonist rejects that narrative and chooses instead to maybe scold the spirit or engage with it instead of fearing it. That subverts like reader expectations, right? Because when you are watching like a horror movie, you kind of expect people to fear the ghost that you don't understand, the ghost that is clearly an other. But over here, the other becomes accessible, and through that accessibility and through the interactions with them, they also often become very human, ironically. I would like to not spoil any of the stories in here for you. Anyway, this book is so good. You need to go and read it. You really must go and read it. It's like 5 stars. Go and read it. If you're Singaporean, or maybe if you're Malaysian, or maybe you've always like had a fascination with ghosts like I have, then okay, go and read it. Okay, so that is the end of my February booktube. I don't really have a TBR for March, but as you can see, my bookshelf is up. So there are some books that I have yet to read that I've always been meaning to get to. Maybe March is the time that I will actually get to them. But honestly, I have a lot of work to clear. So I was thinking I could get a head start on it as well. That is most likely what I'll be doing in March. I hope I can read maybe 5 books in March. That's the goal. Keep it simple. It's a SMART goal. It's specific, it's measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Yes. 5 books. That's all I want. That's all for now. I will see you in a month's time. I haven't really got the time to go and schedule my normal vlogs, so I think I will save that for later. In any case, it's not like the past can change, right? So I don't really see the rush. So until March, bye bye.